It's not being recorded yet, is it?
Just start.
Just started.
Right after.
Best city in the state of Ohio, just beneath
Oh,
Columbus.
get inside.
And just above Cincinnati. I mean, I can make fun of Cincinnati, I'm sort of from around there. Yeah. Sort of, yeah. Where's that?
Where are you from?
Well, I'm from Hamilton, just north of there.
Oh.
Great city, Hamilton. So, okay, you guys ready for today? No, I got something for you guys. This is fun today. Or you won't, I can really care less. Just kidding. You can tell it's getting time to get close to SEI. You guys are the best students ever, I would tell you that. I've never had a class full of so energetic and smart students as you. Okay, so this is just, thanks. That side of the room. Clearly I overestimated. Thanks. So let's see, there are officially 72 more. Around you, chat about it, talk about it. Just, a little something to celebrate. The week is hot week, comes and parties. Learn change. Otherwise known as the world's ending week. Yeah. Quite fascinating. I went to my office today for the first time and a long time. I was sending copies. I couldn't remember what the code was. It had been like 2 years. Fantastic. I had to go ask somebody. Glad someone was in the building. Anyway, just read that chit chat. Discuss. Anybody looking forward to not wearing masks anymore? Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty much looking forward to that. It's getting pretty annoying. Oh, shoot, I gotta tell people online. If I can, I'm gonna put it on second. I'll put it up there right now. Cool. Grace, I'm gonna go find it. Just in time. It's an exam. We're graded for 300 points. 38%. Okay. Just kidding. Just kidding. Just read it, chit chat with others. And you see them start chit chatting, discussing, whatever, however we want to say that. You guys have a word for chit chat in Dutch?
Kletsen,
Is that, what was that?
kletsen.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's the same thing, means the same thing?
Yep.
Okay, all right. See, there's something, some word like that in every language.
So you're gonna upload.
Yeah, I'm doing it now. Okay, Thomas, I got it on there. It took a second. Yeah, you guys should discuss, like, team up with some people around you, chat about it. Don't be shy. What do you guys think?
Alright, well, I like semi-quoted Churchill and saying that it's the worst. It's like 6%. Converted.
That's my personal opinion. I was just frustrated.
Journalist, yeah. It's not really. So I feel like I am here. I wasn't trying to miss those. I think a lot of it is not like we get implemented out to the rep, versus, you know, perfect collection. Everything occurs in that grade. So my experience, it might sound like I really don't say, you know, my is too costly and it's going to hinder project or my goals in a way. So yeah, if I like to go. So that's why, but you know what I'm saying? So. In the long run, I mean, what's your opinion? Political outrage. Yeah, so. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to. That's why just like there's a back. Never made it once the Senate. Would the American Standard be history? Yeah, I guess would have. So you're so what you're saying about and you're saying part about the history of the line yeah. Yeah, it's like everyone stop.
Yeah.
I think that everyone's going to.
Yeah.
So carbon tax, everything I put is a lot of angry impacts for them. But I think the incentives of like learning about what we can do to incentivize the like by like cutting costs by 25 dollars. Yeah. So something like that. Yeah.
The amount of stuff we can see. Energy wise, yeah, I think that's actually a problem. In terms of finding. I think some of the products just make so taxing that if you look at it as a standpoint of like society, too many products that are so products, and I feel like it doesn't sound
Remember how we talked about before water profits, yeah, or less yeah, because you're so young, rather than like we have all this curriculum, we're like, no, just not like their posters or all the other stuff. But at the same time, that is what keeps us alive. We need to for our economy. Like, we'll have jobs that create those things.
Yeah.
And somewhere in a sentence from World War I, the president at the time said, the economy, and that's why so much money is sunk for public works and stuff, basically just like art and big things, more sanitized and other things. And, you know, if we were just to cut out entire industry, then that would affect a much larger number of people than just like the CEOs of businesses who maybe have their jobs.
I think.
Yeah, it's.
We existed to your point, some people that is exactly right. And that's a system. If you say, you know, the way to everybody eventually the hard stops. Like, just say the problems or something else. Like, you can only solve for the United States.
I think that's
Houses.
I guess that's right.
I feel like that's why it's a hard problem to solve. And both sides have the experts saying it will be together. I really think that's right answer. There's just some form.
Same thing with like, for houses, it's like, yeah, we're running out of wood.
You know what my favorite thing in this class is? The Dutch person is America. I wish I knew your name. I really wish I knew. What's your name?
Sorry?
What's your name?
Wow.
Okay. I'm sorry. All right.
Please try. There was no effort on your part there.
Yeah,
That's typical though.
It's not even a Dutch name either. So.
Is your name Dutch?
No, it's not.
It's not?
No.
What is it?
So it's originally from Braine, which is a Dutch name, but my parents, I don't know, wanted to be different. So
They just want
it's
to be
just Pau. It's like a comic book, like Pau.
Wow.
Yeah, like that's how, like, people always say like, oh, like a comic book, like Pau Pau.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
actually, I hope that's not on video. I could probably get. Wow, okay. So really, okay, so that's not so hard. I should have tried. I should have put some effort in on that one. It was so easy. It just sounds so hard.
Yeah.
You can still try.
Terrible. Terrible. I kind of get my kids confused, really. Okay, well. Okay, what do we got? So, okay, what are the, let's go. This is good stuff, right? So extra credit for whoever has the best answer. How's that? Extra credit. Who wants to go first with an answer for number one? What do you think? Came up with a, yeah.
So we talked about establishing a federal minimum like renewable portfolio that like all states have to abide by at like
I like it.
15%.
I like this like one. Just seems to be perfect. It's worth this.
Are you trying to get that light on?
Does not work.
It like never turns on and then randomly during one class it just turned on. So I think it's like the water was not.
Oh, yeah, fix that. Okay. So what was that? A federal what? I like a federal. Federal what?
Minimum like renewable portfolio standard that like states would have to abide by,
Like CO2 removal? Or what?
like renewable energy.
Oh, a federal minimum renewable energy standard?
Yeah. So all states would have to have 15% of their energy production be from renewable sources.
50%.
No, 15, like 1.5.
Oh, I thought you were going bold.
No,
You're back in the 1990s then, huh?
I was thinking about Kentucky that has like 6%. I'm like, you gotta throw.
Oh,
them
you're
in.
going to the LCD, lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
Sorry to anyone from the South, you wanted to bring Southern standard to the US, right? Lowest common denominator with renewable energy standards. Or the better football. Okay, okay. Let's just get them all up there first. What else? Yeah?
Ours was like more of a lofty goal, but it was just to have it in theory, but it was to require auto manufacturers to have 50% increase in electric vehicles over the next like 10 years, I guess.
Okay, so a federal electric vehicle standard, how much is that? You said how much?
50% more for the fleet over the next 10 years.
Well, you
Or I
said it
guess
was
half
goal,
of it.
50% more of the current 3%, and it's 4.5%. Is that what you mean? What do you mean?
I guess just like at least half of it.
Okay, so 50% of all cars
Yeah.
sold. Okay, I like it. Okay, that's clear. 50% all new cars sold. Okay. Must be EVs, okay? All right, got that. Yeah,
Well, I guess our overall answer was that this is really complicated and there's a lot of considerations, just like everything in life, but we were kind of talking about cap and trade. So I just got the idea of maybe localized cap and trade systems because it didn't really work for us federally. But yeah, for carbon dioxide. So maybe like internal to every industry, like there's a regulation where they all have to have a cap and trade system, but the fine details can be decided within the sector. And it's just like approved by some regulatory body or something.
so sectoral carbon emission limits or something like that?
Yeah.
that are
Or like a cap and trade system.
With trading,
Yeah.
just within sectors or across sectors?
Like
Probably
within every sector, like they,
So like each sector has a limit, and then within that sector, they can trade with it.
Okay. Into the sector, right. So steel manufacturers can trade within the steel manufacturing. Automobile people can trade within automobiles, whatever other people can do stuff.
That way you can set like a top limit for like all US emissions and then break it down by sector, instead of just having it be a free for all.
Okay. All right. Yeah,
We talked about like implementing the return system of the bottle return at grocery stores to incentivize plastic recycling and reduction.
okay, so recycling and reduction of what?
Plastic.
Of plastic. Just a federal mandate.
Yeah, so it's like specifically in grocery stores, customers can like turn in like plastic bottles of big that, and then it gives them like a gift card to use at that grocery store. Or if they bring in like, they can buy like glass bottles in stores, and then if they bring them in again, like turn them in, it like takes off the price that customers would pay to have for like, the bottle.
Would you do it like other states do it in the US where they have like the 5 cent per, you have to pay an extra 5 cents? And you get the 5 cents back, or you return the bottle or the,
Yeah, it was like getting money back. I don't know.
because some states do that, right? There's a bunch of states that do. Some states just have recycling. I think all of them have, almost never see it as recycling for bottles and stuff like that now, but the ones that like Michigan has 10 cents a bottle or something like that. Other states have 5 cents. It's mostly eastern states.
Like adding that level of getting something back from it, so.
Okay, is there a way you could sort of do that for something besides just plastic, so that you have more of a carbon impact? Would there be like a product you could think about having a recycling type mandate for?
Not right this second.
Anyone else think something? Yeah?
I was thinking of like old electronics, like old cable boxes and stereos that like no one like uses anymore.
Could that be like a friendly amendment to your proposal, like recycling for, I don't know, all kinds of electronic crap, right?
Yeah, sounds good.
What else?
I know that you does this, but provide like full transparent sustainability reports on every financial statement, so investors know.
That's kind of a different one, right?
What's that?
That's a different one.
Oh, I thought we were going a different one, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's cool. That's fine.
That was my bad.
It's all good. Full disclosure, full corporate disclosure of carbon stuff or everything.
I mean, ideally everything, but.
Just spelling that right? What the hell is that? I'm sorry. I do apologize for my terrible tongue. I was really happy when my kid said a very bad word the other day, blamed it on my dad. I was really happy about that. I was like, go grandpa. Okay. Carbon. Plus, I don't know, give us that, right? Okay. Okay, scope 1, 2, 3, all of them? What everyone knows scope 1, 2, and 3 are? What's scope 1? Scope 1 is
Directed.
so scope 1 is direct emissions from the actual corporation, right? Scope 2 is what? Scope 2 is the consumed energy. Okay, so scope 1 would be like the Amazon trucks driving around, right? Those are Amazon, they have Amazon thing on. Scope 2, I believe, is the electricity you buy, basically. So it's the emissions from that, I think. Someone should look it up on Google, make sure. Purchased. And then scope 3 is all the supply chain, all the other stuff. So would you include all that in there?
I mean, I think all this important. I would, a lot of work to do that, those like audits and that, but.
So what happens though when, I mean, here's the issue with some of this, if your scope 3 is somebody else's scope 1, right? So it's kind of, there's some double reporting there, right? So it gets a little complicated when you start going down, getting further down below scope 1. It's like scope 2 stuff is actually, AEP is actually is disclosing that, right? But then if OSU is disclosing the same emissions that AEP is disclosing, I mean, maybe it's nice to see OSU do that, but on the other hand, you can never take these and add them up to get the national total emissions, right? Just have to keep that in mind. So, okay. All right, good, it's 5 on them. What else? Yeah.
Creating regulations that are not voluntary to stop non-point source, not emissions, what would it be called?
You said regulations?
Yes,
To stop what?
non-point source pollution.
From, you mean carbon dioxide stuff,
No, it's just like, like the discharge.
like water?
No, more like chemicals like fertilizer and stuff.
Oh, yeah, okay, so agricultural stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, wow, you guys are bold, okay. I'm just gonna say agriculture, 'cause that's the key one, right? right? So agriculture is 10% of US emissions, actually 10% of global emissions. And it comes from what, so 3 things. Nitrous oxide stuff, so NOx, which is really potent greenhouse gas emission or greenhouse gas source. What's the, you know, global warming potentials? Have you heard of those?
Yeah.
So what's the, so we could take, well, let me put the other one, that CH4, which is methane, right? Is the other one. And what's the global warming potential of each of them? So this one is, I think around like 26, and this one's like around 200 something. 230, I think 230. So what that means is 1 ton of CH4 to the atmosphere equals 230 tons of CO2 in terms of their impact. All right, that's what those numbers mean. And for NOx, it's like 26. Okay. Okay, so agriculture is really big because it, you know, it doesn't take a lot of that methane. Okay, so how does agriculture emit methane? Cows. So that, manure, cow manure. What else? What are the big source? Less big in the US, big globally. Rice paddies. So paddy rice, so there's 2 ways of producing rice. Rice can be produced in paddies, which are underwater, which is anaerobic underwater, and that produces methane. So it's like a wetland. The second form of rice production does not produce methane, which is dryland rice. So the US is fortunately mostly dryland rice. So we have high CH4 in terms of cows, we have a lot of cows. And we have low CH4 from methane. We have high NOx. How do we get NOx from agriculture? Okay, so fertilizer. All right, there's one other source, which is just CO2 from soils, right? And that can go up or down. It's currently a source in the US because there has been an increase in land in intensive agriculture as a result of high prices from the 2010 to 2014 period that induced some additional land to convert over to agriculture, so not converted back. And there's been intensification, so there's been some reduction in conservation tillage. So it's some carbon dioxide from soils. Okay, so that's what you guys meant?
Mhm.
Okay, like it. What else? Yeah.
I just like to implement a carbon tax that incrementally increases like every probably 5 years, but then like it wouldn't actually be implemented for like probably 5 years, so companies can actually like acclimate.
So I didn't hear your voice. So you would implement the carbon tax, but
Yep.
you would wait 5 years to do it?
Yep, so then like companies can actually acclimate and
Oh, okay.
learn how to.
So kind of a graduated carbon tax, you know, it takes some time to sort of scale it up, right? Okay. All right. I'm just gonna leave this carbon tax, start writing all that down. I like that. Carbon tax. On what? On everything, every carbon emission?
I mean, that's hard, but depending on like how the computer reports, I guess. But I mean, it'd be the scope 1 direct emissions.
Yeah, so on scope 1 stuff. But would you implement it on like households? Like, so for those of us who use natural gas?
So it would, trying to figure out how to articulate this. So like people would have to pay the carbon tax, but then like the government collects that money, maybe like giving back to the citizens and not corporations or companies, like maybe like quarterly.
Give it back to people?
And then like invest in that back into.
Okay. So maybe through taxes, you'd give people tax rebates, right?
Yep.
So you'd raise the price of energy, but give them a tax rebate so that they could spend it on other stuff.
That way you're holding like the bigger emitters at fault and like.
Okay.
accountable.
And people who are, because, one of the things that's been a big concern about energy taxes over history is that they're regressive. So they hit poor people worse because poor people tend to consume a higher proportion of their income goes to energy stuff.
Yep.
So this is a way to have the effect of, trying to push them to consume less energy, but also not reducing their income, right?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So carbon tax, so oftentimes it's called carbon tax and rebate. You'll hear people say that, it's kind of discussed a lot right now. Where the rebate part is if people's income tax, give people a rebate for the tax that they paid annually for energy stuff, okay? So basically everything, you tax everything.
Yep.
Okay. Democrat. Yeah, I could care less what his political affiliation was. My funnest day in class, the funnest day ever was, I showed up the day Obama was here, this was like in 2012, he was on campus for the election. And his class was in this room, actually. That was on Ramside, it was a different room. And he was just over there on the Oval giving his talk. There's like 15 people in class. I totally forgot that he was even here. And it was great, like, I showed up to the class, I'm like, oh, I guess it's just the Republicans in class. I think you should see these kids like, say, no. I was like, I was just kidding around. I mean, I could care less. It was really funny though. So sorry about that. I shouldn't put it on video. Yeah.
We also thought about like.
You have two policies?
Yeah. You got time.
You said one.
Well, and the second one kind of bounces off of like the opposition from the first one, the electric vehicles, which would be to implement like more high-speed rail in the US.
Okay, high-speed rail. So public transportation type stuff, right? Are you just limiting the high-speed rail, or is it okay to have public transportation?
Yeah.
Transportation. The Hyperloop. Are you a Hyperlooper?
Not necessarily.
I think I'd be afraid to crush that thing. Be kind of nervous about that. Okay, public transportation, that's good. I can see how that, so yours is the electric vehicle one? Okay. Yeah, there's kind of an odds on fit public transportation, electric vehicles. Although you're probably thinking electric vehicles for in-town stuff and public transportation, this way you're thinking high-speed rail, that's more, right?
Yeah, it was that, and it was also electric vehicles are pretty expensive right now, and they may not be affordable for just trying to power.
Okay, yeah.
So they could opt to try and just use public transportation more, so that would increase demand for more public transportation.
Okay, some equity issues with, of course, it depends on how you do this one, right? So you didn't, I mean, if you had subsidies for the cars, right? To help lower their costs, for less well off. The downside of that is all the evidence we ever have for any of these subsidy programs, is even if they're designed to try to help out people who afford, it's almost always the rich people who take advantage of it. Just seems to be the case. It's really difficult to get those subsidy programs that actually benefit people who are less well off. Even if that's the intention of it. It's just very complicated public policy issue. Yeah.
I just have a question. How would generally like the rich benefit more from the subsidies?
Well, it's not that the subsidies, like, so California, and there's also been a federal production tax credit on electric vehicles. And it just turns out that it still is true that the electric vehicles, even with the subsidy, are still relatively more expensive than other kinds of cars. So almost all the people who've gotten the subsidies are richer, above the median income in the US. Just simply because even with the subsidy, so what was the subsidy for electric vehicles? It was for each company, it was up to 250,000 vehicles. I think the only company that's gone beyond that is Tesla. So there was like a $7,500 per car subsidy for each vehicle up to 250,000 produced. And so theoretically, that should lower the price you're able to sell the car at, but they were still, you know, Teslas were still obviously much more expensive than typical other sedans and cars like that, right? So mostly just brings people down. So that's true of both subsidies. I mean, agricultural sector is the same thing, right? It's that, you know, as hard as the federal government tries to make sure agricultural subsidies are spread out more evenly across the farm sector, it tends to be that the more wealthy farmers tend to get the subsidies at a higher clip. You know, it makes some sense because, you know, these paperwork, it might be true with electric vehicles, I don't know. Paperwork for farm subsidies is so complicated, you have to have a lawyer and an accountant do it, right? So the difficulty is actually getting the paperwork. So I mean, there's lots of reasons why so that's a good idea. So sort of marry the two. So public transportation, you don't have to have a lawyer to get on the bus, right? Yeah. Okay, I like it. What else? Anything else? Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know if it's already exists, but like, we could have like a allowance by the government to invest in more green technologies or to incentivize the US to invest in greener technologies in other countries.
Tax credits for green technologies. Beyond renewable energy? Well, I mean, that's a big thing, actually. There was a big article. This one is in the Financial Times. Actually, I was trying to find the article. I couldn't get it. There was an article in the Financial Times. That's why I use this one. But there was an article from someone I saw somewhere where they were arguing that we need a set of tax incentives for other green technologies, the kind of stuff to make buildings more efficient. Other kinds of investments beyond solar and wind, because we already have had production tax credits for that, right? So the argument was we need to do that for other sectors as well. So that kind of the argument?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. I like it. That's the best one yet. It's a good one though. I like it. Yep. You get your hand up. I just set your hand up. But not really up.
Yeah.
Okay. What else? Okay, so that's good. So which one's the best one?
Number one.
Number one? You gonna fight for it?
Oh, yeah.
Why?
I mean, 15%. It's realistic.
15%
It's realistic.
It's like, oh, Ohio State won 15% of their football games. Go Bucks. Yeah.
A little different.
Oh, because we have a higher standard at Ohio State for football games, right? Okay, 15%. What do you think? Rest of the class, what are you gonna go? Thumbs up, thumbs down on that?
Yeah, this
50% bigger.
This one's immediate.
Oh, 50% is bigger, so this was even better. This is bigger, yeah. I like it.
I would say that ours, number 3, limits the amount of people you have to go through, and it lets you, you know, do what works for your sector specifically. So it's more flexibility, and people that are inside the sector and have like inside knowledge on how it works can work it out. Whereas it's not just like flat, you have to do this 50%. So.
Sector by sector. Okay.
So let's set like a hard cap. I feel like a lot of policies are kind of just like hoping, though, like it's like, you know, you make something, you hope the changes that you want to see happen. But this is able to, well, for good or bad, probably, depending on like what it does to the industries, but you're actually able to set a hard cap and there won't be able to be any pushbacks on it.
Well, let me ask you about that. Another one on this one. Would you guys entertain any sort of flexibility on this part of it? Right, so, okay, I'm an economist, I love cap and trade, but I don't know that I can imagine a cap and trade for, say, agriculture. I don't know how you do a cap and trade system for these nitrogen emissions or for cows, for God's sakes. I mean, how am I gonna put a cap on a bunch of cows in a field? I'm gonna put a little thing on their butts to keep the stuff coming out. I mean, seriously. So, I mean, the serious point is that, you know, could you imagine that maybe in addition to doing that there are sector-specific limits that you might want to have, like you don't want to have a 50% reduction for every sector, but maybe for the steel sector, 25% reduction, right? For the tech sector, 80% reduction because it's so cheap for them to do it, right? I don't know, so you sector by sector things?
Yeah, and things like, agriculture, you couldn't really measure the amount of nitrogen a specific cow is, but you could, I'm sure somebody out there knows the average of how much a cow.
Yeah, but everyone's cows are different.
Yeah, but like if you make like some sort of educated guesses and then you see, depending on how many cows somebody's allowed to have. That's just a thought. We could be flexible.
Well, I'm just wondering, could you, I mean, as much as I love trading, could you say use trading in the sectors where trading
Yeah, where
can
it
work
works.
and maybe other things in sectors where trading's not gonna work?
What about recs? Like we could have the tech sector, it's so cheap for them to reduce their emissions. They could sell those credits to the farmers who just can't control those cows.
Yeah,
So
okay.
that would technically not, I guess it wouldn't be like you're limited to trade carbon credits within your sector, that you can trade with other sectors, that it's easier for them to lower the emissions, but maybe like the sector specific thing is like the limits.
Like that would kind of defeat the purpose. So I think we want to kind of, because then if we're giving, more emissions to a different thing, that kind of defeats the purpose of having a cap there.
Practically though, so who has a cap and trade system? So California has a cap and trade system for any large emitting sources. And what they do is they take the large emitting sources and they put a cap on them. But then they allow the agricultural sector to supply offsets. Okay, so they allow them to go and reduce emissions from nitrogen oxide from cows. So California actually does try to go trace the poop out of every single cow, actually, they do. And then they also allow tree-based offsets, so growing trees or reducing harvest and things like that, reduce carbon emissions into the atmosphere by sucking carbon out of the atmosphere, and they allow those as offsets. So that's kind of what Grace, I think, is kind of what you're implying, right? So people, they do that, right?
Yeah.
So if you're like California and you got, 100 tons going up, right? And you want to cap that at 80, right? So you want to get this, I don't know how to do that nicely. That's kind of the baseline, but you want to get it to 80, all right? And it started out at 100 originally, right? And you could have these sort of trees growing over here, right? And so if you want to get down to 80 in total, and these are producing stuff, right? If this is producing, say, a minus 10, right? So 100 minus 10 is 90. If you really want to get this to 80, right, you can set this, whatever cap on these guys at whatever level you want to account for this. So you can still give these companies the flexibility of buying up these credits, offsets, but you can adjust this thing in order to get yourself down to the total 80 that you want. Okay, I don't know if that's clear or not.
Yeah.
But the idea is you can act, so people are actually doing this. This is actually the closest, not that it's the best, but it's the closest to what we're doing in the real world right now, actually, right? So we actually do have a set of sector level. And if you look at some of these things, I mean, many of these other ones are kind of sector level components, right? They're the kind of things you would actually do within a national policy that recognizes that sectors are different. You wouldn't want to have a single sort of policy for every sector. Okay. Yeah.
I like 7 just because it's mainly towards like corporations, which tend to be most of polluting for climate change. And I guess if there's anything corporations hate, it's paying taxes and losing money, so that can incentivize them to try and adopt more green technology that are like sustainable practices.
Okay, so you like this one? You didn't tell me this one.
No.
There's an honest person like that, and both of you. Did you pay him? you're not gonna get this right now.
The only thing about 7 would be if there's other emissions on other gases that are still detrimental to the environment, that are still being emitted without looking at.
Okay, you know, you could actually adjust that, right? So if you have a carbon tax that's $20 a ton for carbon, right? Per ton CO2, $20 per ton CO2, right? And you want to figure out the equivalent tax for CH4, what would it be? It's 20 times 230.
Okay, so just making sure that's included.
So yeah, so this kind of a thing should, if you're doing it correctly, should actually do that for other gases. Maybe, you know, Congress may not do that, but that's what you should, that'd be the right thing. Make sense? And the big ones are the CFCs, those are the ones with the refrigerants, right? Those are like, the global warming potentials like refrigerants are in the 4,000 range. So 1 ton of stuff we use in our refrigerators, which is probably 5,000 refrigerators. There's a ton in each refrigerator, it's like more than 1 million to the ton. But they're really super, they would have really high taxes. Yeah.
I like the one that I suggested.
Oh, go figure.
Mostly because I think that agriculture is kind of not necessarily at the forefront of the debates about pollution, but it does contribute a large amount. And most of the policies for non-point sources are like voluntary, when they should be more like looked at and like be able to be audited and stuff like that.
Okay, so you want to go for the farmers,
Yep.
solve the earth,
Mhm.
trying to take them down.
I mean, like not taking them down per se.
Just put them into place.
Yeah.
Make sure they put that emission. Well, actually, so what's the big excitement about this sector right now? In terms of reducing emissions, what's everybody talking about? What do you guys all talk about? What's your biggest worry about? Food,
Food waste,
reducing food waste, and what else?
deforestation,
What?
deforestation.
Okay, so deforestation is a big source of carbon emissions in the tropics as a result of expansion of what? So what kinds of agriculture? Cattle. What do we get from cattle? What?
Meat.
Meat. Besides milk, we get meat, right? So what's the big issue? What's everyone worried about besides food waste? Meat consumption. Yeah. Is that what you were gonna say?
Yeah.
Yeah. Meat consumption, right? So there's a big effort globally to try to sort of help solve this problem by just reducing the amount, by actually, so if we reduce food waste, what is it, in the US and developed countries, something like 30% of food is wasted, right? So theoretically, if you can reduce the food waste, you can reduce the quantity of food that gets produced, and theoretically less of this stuff, right?
No, it would reduce you know it would reduce food waste, is if we had slightly less stringent public health measures, and if we were like, because grocery stores, like, if at the end of the day, you know, your food isn't sold or X many hours or whatever, you have to throw it away. Like, if you just extended that by a little bit, but I mean, I'm not advocating that we all.
I'm not convinced of that.
Rely.
I think if we just got rid of kids, I just look around my house and I kids, my food waste would be practically nil. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've cooked a perfectly adequate meal that didn't get eaten. Yeah, adequate, that's all it is adequate, yeah, I promise. Okay, so, but meat consumption could potentially, you know, because we talked about animals, especially cows, so.
I just have a question about agriculture. What, like compared to just like normal agriculture that we think of, how does like vertical farming fit in sustainability? Is that sustainable because it feeds more people, or does it just require way too much energy and water?
That's a great question. So vertical farming is a water system. The great thing about that, it's more expensive, right? Because, so what is it that makes agriculture on farm fields, say in Ohio, really, really successful?
Thanks.
one is land is cheap, and two is that rain falls pretty much for free during the summer times, right? Soil is great, right? But that's the land part, right? And the second part is they get free pest elimination via winter times, right? And so when you actually are doing vertical agriculture, you have to, pay for the water, you have to pay for the sewage treatment. So it's the other thing that makes agriculture such a growing interest in Ohio is the free use of streams for eliminating waste, right? There's nitrogen and phosphorus and other kinds of chemicals that they get off the farm and into the environment. So, all that's really free and cheap. That's what makes it, so vertical farming is that, right? Because every city has sewage treatment plants and you can't, none of us get to just dump our sewage waste into the sewage system without paying for it, right? So it's pretty expensive if you're dumping a lot of nitrogen-based water back into the system. So it just makes it expensive. So it's more expensive to do vertical agriculture. So food would be more costly. Having said that, there's clearly a lot of appetite amongst people who want fresh local greenery all year round, that they're willing to pay high prices for that kind of stuff, right? So, whether that ever makes it to the commodity level that we currently have in the agricultural system is a big question. I'm doubtful, but for sure, in terms of people's interest in specialty stuff that's highly valuable, crops that you can eat, there's gonna be more of it. So there will be more vertical agriculture, just never be able to produce as much. That make sense?
Yes.
I think also, like what you said, the energy costs would really increase the energy consumption simply because light doesn't go horizontally. So you have layers of vegetation, you have to be giving them light, all of them.
Correct.
So you need to have lights on every single layer. So
All that's expensive.
Back to what you said about refrigerant being one of the most responsible emissions, that's actually changing soon just with new CO2 refrigerant technology. So in the future, that may not be as big of a concern.
So I haven't read about that, but so figuring out ways to incentivize more of that, right? Incentivize more ways to create the kinds of things you want without as much going on. Yeah. I like it. Okay. So you guys did a great job. So in honor of your incredible work today, everybody gets to have credit, extra credit. Thomas will have to do Go handle that. We got just, I gotta do a few slides, okay? And then, I know you guys love slides. You guys love slides, right? You guys love it?
My favorite.
Yeah, I know. Good stuff. You guys are brilliant. Oh, honest, this is a brilliant class. This really is the most brilliant class ever.
Other than all your other classes.
Other than this class, you guys are great. And then can you get anyone who's online? That's it. Okay. And so I gave Thomas, I haven't created the other extra credits on there. We'll do that. Except for you. You walked out right when I said that. You can just stay here the whole time. So go find Pal. Yeah, and then I'll grade that extra credit thing. Just so you know. And the one for the lecture, Thomas, I put that up there, just gonna put the numbers in there. You guys haven't seen the first grade for quiz number, the last quiz?
Yeah.
Is it showing up to you? That's done, okay, good. Somehow I can't actually see it online. I mean, I can go in and see your individual ones, but I'm not seeing the whole list of them. Okay, so there you go. Just a quick thing on climate change. You guys, is everyone familiar with climate change? I mean, you want a quick, I mean, I know, you just never know where everybody is on the subject matter, how close people pay attention to the science and whatnot. So Yeah, the idea is what? The idea is by adding carbon to the atmosphere. What's happening with sunlight that's coming in warms the earth. And a lot of that radiation would radiate back out into space. But because we have an atmosphere, some of it's trapped in the atmosphere. Okay. So it's not the sunlight coming in, it's the fact that radiation and heat from the sunlight coming in can't get back out to space, and that's what warms the earth, right? So that's just a thing that there's virtually no debate about that. Zero. Yeah.
That's not about that the sun is coming in, but isn't there some technology or like brainstorming around like using clouds to reflect sunlight so there's less to the atmosphere? Have you heard of that or?
Yeah, so that was a mistake on my part too. It's not really about the sun coming in. The real issue is that, you know, the sun heats the earth. The earth is what? It's just a big piece of rock, right? Heats the earth, and that heat would tend to radiate back into space, and the atmosphere traps it. So you're correct. If we can reduce the amount of sunlight coming in, we get less heating of the earth, and therefore, even though we're not re-radiating as much, if less is coming in, less is still re-radiating, right? Trap. So yes, so there are technologies proposed that would put more, you know, reflectors in the sky, more clouds in the sky to try to keep sunlight from getting in. And there's lots of evidence that, of course, the sunspots, that there's an 11-year cycle on sunspots, right? There's 100,000 year and 20,000 year cycles of the Earth's rotation around the sun, which affect the amount of radiation we get that do change climate on Earth, right? So those things do happen. There's very little debate about those things, right? I mean, the reason why we've had ice ages in the past is because, you know, every 20,000 years or so, we're further away from the sun than we are right now. So, and for sure, roughly 10,000 years from now, we'll probably be back in another ice age, right? So, heaven forbid what I'll look like if I'm still alive 10,000 years from now. Right? Okay, so the debate about is, of course, about not so much about this, but about whether or not a lot of extra carbon in the atmosphere will actually change the equation, right? There's not an enormous amount of debate, but there is some debate. We're not going to talk about the debate. Where do gases come from? You know, fossil fuel burning, cement production, fertilizer use, rice paddies, cows, deforestation. There are natural emission sources, forest fires. Many of them are natural. An increasing proportion of them are human caused because there's more humans. Forest decomposition. There's an ocean atmosphere exchange, and there's a lot of marine microorganisms that create carbon, methane, et cetera, right? So there's lots of sources, some natural, some anthropogenic. We're less worried about the natural ones. We're really worried about the human ones, right? Okay, so that's that. What goes up must come down. So all the carbon that we put in the atmosphere has to go somewhere. It goes to three pools. Those three pools are the ocean, green stuff, the biosphere, and the atmosphere. The atmosphere is what we worry about. Actually, worry about all of them. Actually, worry a lot about the ocean. What happens when we get more ocean? Yeah.
It acidifies.
Yeah. So carbonic acid, right? So as you add more carbon to the ocean, you get more acidic ocean. Causes problems for plants and fish life and mammal life that exists in the ocean, right? The big thing is coral bleaching, right? So coral reefs get die off. They don't really, I guess they call it bleaching. Oh, it's really bleaching when they die off and basically turn white. Okay. We haven't really found a really huge negative part of the green one, which is the biosphere one, is carbon fertilization. Probably a great deal of the increase in crop growth that we've gotten in the last century has been as a result of carbon fertilization. For sure, tree growth is a result of carbon fertilization. So there are bigger trees all over the world because of that, right? But just remember that all the carbon that goes up in the atmosphere is a result of fossil fuel burning, and this is deforestation in the tropics, this brown area. It's a pretty big amount, right? It's about 10% of our emissions. It goes into one of these three things, all right? So that's that. Okay, so the most important part here is what's the economic problem? What is the economic problem? So just to recap, from way back when, we're sucking these fossil fuels out of the ground, right? We're taking them out of non-renewable sort of sources in the ground, big pits in the ground, if you will, of coal, natural gas, and oil. We're taking it out of the ground. We're burning it. We're sticking it in the atmosphere. We're filling up the atmosphere with carbon dioxide, right? Okay, so this is two different non-renewable resource problems, right? So one of them is the one we already talked about, which is this. You remember we talked about this non-renewable issue of sucking coal, natural gas, or oil out of the ground, right? And we're gonna run out someday. We talked about this idea of a marginal user cost, where we extract a ton a day and we leave the future with fewer tons, right? So one part of this economic problem is that, by taking this stuff out of the ground, we're using it, hopefully using it for something somewhat decent. That is, I think you people are okay, right? I mean, we're using all these fossil fuels to make your lives better, right? I don't think people intentionally originally started to take all this stuff out of the ground for bad purposes. They didn't intend to cause climate change. Just so happened they discovered eventually that we discovered over time that we did cause climate change. And now we maybe have to rethink it, but nobody originally thought it was terrible, right? So in taking that stuff out of the ground, we're kind of leaving the future with less of it, less of an opportunity to, make their own living. So we call that a marginal user cost, right? Okay, so there's a cost of the future of taking this stuff out of the ground. One component of that marginal user cost, one component of that is that the future has less of this resource in the ground to use for themselves, right? So your kids, my kids, your kids' kids, et cetera, have less of this great fossil fuel resource to use for their own ingenuity, right? Right, so that's what we talked about so far. But the other side of that is that we're filling up the atmosphere, right? And the atmosphere is also a non-renewable resource. You think about it. And while it's not exactly true that there's a real limit to the amount of carbon we can put out there, right? We don't have any evidence that, it's not like we're, these deposits in the ground, if we went to stick all that stuff back down there, we would ultimately fill them up with oil and gas or coal, right? We stuck all the coal we use or all the oil we use back in the ground, we'd have to, there's only so much space down there for it, right? So in the atmosphere, it's not clear that the atmosphere is quite the same. However, if we think of it the same like that, we realize that, we're filling this thing up over time, right? It's not something we want to do. And with a non-renewable resource in the atmosphere is what? It's the part of the atmosphere that doesn't have so much carbon dioxide, right? So it's this sort of fluid, the clean part of the atmosphere, right? And the problem with carbon dioxide is that if you stick it up there, it stays up there, right? Just like if we tried to pump a gallon of oil back in the ground, right? That gallon would be there next year. Agree with me on that? You took a gallon of oil from up here somewhere and stuck it back in the ground, it would be there a year from now, probably. It's not going to disappear. I mean, where's it going to go? Same thing with the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. A third of the carbon that we pump up there is there for a long time, right? So it's kind of like a non-renewable resource up there. Right? We're sticking the carbon in. As we add new tons, we just keep expanding the amount of tons, and we're taking up the capacity of the atmosphere to not kill us, right? The climate damages. All right, so there's a different marginal user cost that we're going to think about with the atmosphere as we add those tons to the atmosphere. Each ton, because it sits up there for a while, causes damage to you, me, and to people in the future, right? If carbon went up in the atmosphere and immediately left the atmosphere, we wouldn't be worried about it. It wouldn't be an issue, right? But the fact that it goes up there, it stays up there, so the tons that people put up there in 1940 are still up there, and we're putting tons in today and filling this thing up, like a balloon in a bathtub or something like that. If you heard the bathtub analogy, that's the part that hurts us, right? So the same way we thought of a marginal user cost down here, we have a marginal user cost up there. Each additional ton that we stick in there, that marginal user cost is the increased damages to the future. And we're gonna call that the social cost of carbon, all right? So the social cost of carbon is really important because it is a marginal user cost, right? The same way we had this cost of the future of stealing these things out of here, these same tons cause a marginal user cost on future generations, which is actually on the opposite side of the equation, which is the damage, right? Okay, does that make somewhat sense? Some little bit of sense of shred of sense? Okay. And that damage, that user cost actually just keeps increasing as we keep adding tons up there. And it's because it's a stock that it causes damages and that they keep getting bigger. So here's a picture of the atmosphere at different points in time, 1960, 1985, 2020. And because in 1960, we hadn't emitted as much carbon as we have by now, right? We didn't have as much carbon dioxide in that atmosphere. And the damages, the social cost of carbon, the present, so the social cost of carbon is defined as the present value of future damages from climate change. All right. So because, in 1960, there was a small amount up there, and also because even though you recognize there'd be a lot in the future that we were heavy discounters, right? If you're discounting between 1960 and 2020, that's 60 years of discounting at any really positive discount rate. Today's damages from an additional ton of $51 are not that big back in 1960, so it was a really small impact, right? So because they hadn't filled up the atmosphere very much, and because those future damages of having filled up the atmosphere were discounted to a very small level, the social cost of carbon in the 60s wasn't so big. We only had 317 parts per million. By 1985, we had 350 or 346 parts per million. Now social cost of carbon was a little bit bigger. And by today, it's a lot bigger, right? Because now we fill up the atmosphere significantly, right? And as we look to the future, each one of these additional tons actually does have a bigger impact, right? Yeah.
Is that for the entire world or just for the?
This is for the world. Yeah. So it's sort of a worldwide calculation, which makes sense because, we can't actually limit the damage to other countries whenever we emit a ton here, right? Emitting a ton here, it doesn't have an equal impact on everybody in each part of the world, right? Because those damages don't fall the same. However, a ton emitted here has the same impact as a ton emitted anywhere else, right? Even though those impacts are different for different people. Okay, so it is important to start to get this idea of the social cost of carbon and the two big things that affect it, which one is the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, which is increasing over time, right? So the social cost of carbon will be getting bigger. That is our damages, the impact of our damages, the economic impact of our damages is getting bigger over time. And the second thing, which we'll talk about, not today, but next week, is going to be the second thing that affects the social cost of carbon is the discount rate. It's a huge effect on it. All right, so we'll come back to that next week. So what everyone signed that form somehow and got it to Thomas. Okay, or we'll get it. I'll collect here in a second. So, all right. So there is no class on Thursday. Thursday's a holiday, Veterans Day. So for anyone's a veteran, happy Veterans Day on Thursday. There is a quiz this week. All right, so last quiz. There will be an extra credit quiz later. Okay. You do need to read or go through Bruce's slides for this week. Okay. I'll make a quiz due on Sunday night. All right, good job on the discussion today. I really enjoyed that. Have a great rest of the week and a great weekend. What's up?
Just kind of like in the sense of like hyper stuff like that. It's like, I don't know, I guess like before this class I didn't realize like any issues there were with it. And so I'm just like curious, like, but I guess like my question is then like, how specific should I get like for my order? And like, should I be like